Guyana, land of many waters with 6 races living together.
Globespan is a Guyanese dialogue moving towards the realization of one nation in one Guyana. It's a platform that offers an all-inclusive discussion, with the pros, the cons, the ones that is taken aside, and the ones that stand in the middle. Globespan believes agreeing and disagreeing are part of the nation's building. Globespan believes that every Guyanese voice is part of the nation's building. As we span the globe for voices from the diasporas and those living home, we stand on our commitment that we are all Guyanese working towards one nation in one Guyana.
Coffee and Dr. Jagan, Bobby, she gave us our great sons. Rohan Kanhai, Coffee and Dr. Jagan.
As the world turns on its axis bringing changes, we as Guyanese must adopt to those changes for a better Guyana for all. Globespan stands on its axis with its belief that one nation, one Guyana, one destiny must include voices from all corners of Guyana.
Land of many waters with 6 races living together.
So welcome viewers, listeners to Globespan 24x7, known and operated by Mr. Nohar Singh. Joining us tonight is Mr. Devin Bissoon, as usual, as our technical operator. And this evening we are discussing advancing culture in Guyana. Joining us for discussion of this topic are two very well-known cultural activists in Guyana and in the diaspora as well. Mr. Ravindra Dev, former member of parliament, a representative on Roar, of which he was also the leader, and Mr. Salim Nasruddin, who has had a long history of presence in the diaspora as well as in Guyana. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us this evening for this discussion on advancing culture in Guyana. First of all, today is Valentine's Day, and you know, once a year, I guess people pay attention to love, but I guess in some culture, every day is Valentine's Day. So happy Valentine to everyone. Let us begin the discussion with culture, and let's ask Mr. Ravindra Dev if he could define for us, what is culture? I myself am puzzled by it.
Well, you had a good introduction there with talking about Valentine's Day. Valentine's Day is an aspect of Western culture. And the fact that I, for example, don't pay much attention to Valentine's Day, but my wife gets bent out of shape because I don't, I think it tells you basically that in that cultural artifact called Valentine's Day, a Western innovation somehow permeated the world. And if one doesn't observe it or genuflect to it, something is seriously wrong with you. So what is culture? And all of us, or anybody, should be a bit confused because there's so many definitions of what culture is that it can span the whole gamut of human existence. And that's precisely what it's all about. That in the Western scheme of things, anthropologists study culture. They're the ones who introduced the notion of culture, and they talked about it. So when anthropologists study different groups, they talk about each of these groups having a different cultures. And of course, they try to find some commonality to show that all human groups have some basic things that they have to do. And therefore, they have cultural innovations to address with that. So while they, for example, humans feel they have to get married, they have to come together to procreate, that is a human activity. But in different groups, that institution of creating children, we call it marriage, you call it a family, it differs. So in that sense, we can see that culture allows us to perform certain human actions differently based on our circumstances and what have you. So when we talk about advancing culture, right away we have a problem that it somehow suggests that we have some monolithic culture. There's something called culture, and that is what we should advance. And that is precisely what we have to guard against from the very beginning. Because as I said, if anthropologists discover that man has his own culture, whether he's in India, in Arabia, in Africa, in the Yamamoto, in South America, Brazil, each of them have their culture. And that culture was adapted to their lifestyle. And therefore, to talk about a culture is to do a great disservice to mankind as a whole. But again, this is not by accident. We were brought, all of us, for example, in Guyana, let me make it specific. We were dragged here. Africans were dragged across from Africa and dumped here as they were enslaved, and their culture was stripped from them, and they had to adopt European culture, even though they were mocked when they did so, because they were said to be imitating. We were later dragged, all these indentured laborers, Portuguese and Chinese, us, and each of us brought our culture. So when we talk about advancing our culture, we have to be cognizant that there's no monolithic culture. It's always a number of cultures depending on the peoples that we are talking about, and we try to talk about their cultures, and we get the word multiculturalism. So I will close by just illustrating my point, because in thinking of culture to be concrete, let us take the Indians who were dragged from India into Guyana. We know between 1838 and 1917, 239,000 of them were brought to Guyana. And of those 239,000, 85% were from northern India. And that makes a difference because India is such a huge country that there are numerous cultures within India. So that 85% are from North India. And North India itself, you have Bengal, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Punjab, Maharashtra. So we were brought from, primarily, we are from eastern Uttar Pradesh, western Bihar, and that part, over 70% to 80% of us came from that region called the Bhojpuri belt. From the south, another 15% came. We call them Tamil because the port that they left from was Madras. At that time, it was a huge piece of land that the British governed as the Madras Presidency. So 15%, we call them Madrasi, and they brought their own customs, which all of us know about. I want to make one further distinction that from the north, they were not one homogeneous mass, that within that, you had about 12% Muslims, and the remainder were Hindus. So from a religious standpoint, and from the subcontinent, we see religion playing a pivotal role within what other people call culture. So that is Muslim and Hindu difference also played a part in our culture. So I will stop there to talk when we advance culture. Let us recognize that culture is multitudinous. Culture is not monolithic, and but it gives us a perspective on life, and it offers us to say, well, how ought we to live? So there's three P's. There's a perspective on life. Then we have certain cultural practices, and then we have certain cultural products, of which arts and crafts and so on are part of. So with that long introduction, I would like to pass it back to you, Mr. Moderator.
So just before I bring on Mr. Nasruddin, let me just add some aspects of culture. You did mention religion and language, and added to that would be the way you dress, your clothing, your food habits, your traditions, and you mentioned practices as well. Festivals, the celebration of various festivals. And you did mention in the north and in the south, they have different festivals. And even within the north, certain festivals are celebrated very, very differently. So at times people think, then when we say we are from some people say they are from India. India is not a homogeneous a country. India has like hundreds or thousands of different cultures. We only have like about 6 or 10 different cultures in Guyana, but India, from where our ancestors came from, even among the Northerners, there are hundreds of different cultures. Salim.
So I guess I'm taking off from Ravi and you know, my initial thoughts on what culture is and so on. First of all, I want to say thanks, Vishnu, for having me on this program, and I'm glad that we're talking about culture. I think it's an important aspect of who we are. If it's not there, we are empty people without direction, without purpose, and culture gives us that that foundation, that direction to achieve and to build and to grow and to develop as an individual, as a family, as a community, and as a nation. You know, so my thing is, for me, culture is something that is the essence of who we are. It is it's living, it's dynamic. So, and I'm like, you know, the topic of advancing culture in Guyana, I'm glad that we're using the word advancing and not necessarily a word like preserving, you know, because preserving is great and we need to, and we need to do all of that. But culture, to a large extent, like I said, it's dynamic. It continuously evolve and grow. We are, you know, I believe that I am a product of a culture like everyone else that is an accumulation of millions and millions of years of activities and practice and inventions and creativity and all sort of energy and input into human existence. So I'm an individual that has these millions of years in me, and collectively, when we put all of that together, we have a community or a nation that is the accumulation of all these millions of things that addresses their immediate need and their future need. You heard the word heritage. Heritage is what I bring with me, and here where I am today. But to a large extent, culture gives me a framework to as a person or as a member of a nation to figure out where we need to go, how we need to make this happen, and we use this word today we use the word sustainable, and we have to make it sustainable. We have to make it continue for generation and generation and generation, because at the end of the day, as humans, we are told to be progressive, not to go backward. So and we need a framework that will ensure that when we are moving and we're building and we're growing and we're developing, it's doing all the right things so that it becomes a healthy development. Ravi talked about Indians and of course Africans, enslaved Africans and Portuguese and others who were brought to Guyana or dragged. He used the word dragged to Guyana. But not only bodies were dragged to Guyana. Think about it. When Indians came or blacks came to Guyana, they didn't come with bodies only. Those people came with a consciousness, with a spirit, with a mind, with inherent way of thinking or behaving or reaction to something, how they engage with each other, how they engage with other groups, how they engage with nature, how they engage with their spirit. So when my ancestors came, they didn't bring a whole bunch of bodies and dump them in Guyana, then we had to find a culture. These people came with tremendous amount of wealth at every level, and I think and that is where I believe we need to start realizing that culture didn't begin when we got independence in Guyana in 1966. Our culture didn't begin when somebody decided to start a Ministry of Culture. And culture was there. Of course, there has been tremendous push against Indians, Africans, especially, that came to Guyana, that were dragged to Guyana, that were brought to Guyana by the British to ensure that, if you allow these people to be themselves, they ain't going to work for us. If you allow these people to do their religion, look at America. I just watched a movie called Emancipation with, this famous actor. And it's incredible the amount of pressure that was put on the African body and mind to gut them of who they are. And what was that? What is it? What was that who you are thing? It's your culture. The way you act and behave and promote and develop yourself. That's what culture is. So without going further, my thing is, advancing culture is critical to Guyana. I think we've spent tremendous amount of decades allowing culture in Guyana to just drift in any direction it wants to go. And maybe that's purposeful or not, but there needs to be a more active, engaged handle on culture and how we need to use culture to continue to build and grow Guyana.
Ravi?
Well, I think we're moving into, we've come from a definitional standpoint, and we are trying to ground it into a behavioral terms. And Salim, I think, has brought it into the modern period as to what aspect of culture at this juncture maybe we need to advance at this juncture. So, for example, here we are with this huge oil find, 11 billion barrels and counting. We may complain about the percentage we are getting, but it's the quantum is unheard of based on our history in terms of monies coming in. So there's this large outcry for development. And UNESCO historically has always connected culture with development. And we'll see how these two things are tied together, because it's our culture that gives us a perspective on life. And life includes how we work, how we play, how we spend, whatever we do, is our culture that imparts that perspective to us. So that perspective is critical. It's your worldview. So in a very concrete terms, there's a very famous anthropologist who studied culture. She is from America. She was a MacArthur Genius Scholar. She had gotten it, Brackett Williams. And she came in the late 80s after Rodney had been killed and so on. And she stayed and studied some communities on the East Coast, both Indian and African communities. And she looked at that aspect as to how do we look at work? Because here we are with this new economy, we're supposed to get work under a neoliberal paradigm. You don't just give handouts, you focus on creating jobs, people work, and you advance yourself, whether we like it or not. That's the world we have found ourselves. That's the macro structure into which we are found. And Guyana has to deal with that. So our attitude towards work is critical if we are to take full advantage out of the opportunities now presented by the oil money. And what Brackett Williams found was an interesting thing. She looked at the attitude towards work of Indians versus blacks on the East Coast. And even though she tried to disguise the names of the villages, Cockalorum, she called it, she was really talking about Anns Grove and Clonbrook and that area there. And she summarized her finding by this phrase, that African Guyanese, when they talk about work, they work to live. Very, very proudly they say that we work to live. But Indians, they say, they live to work. Indians live to work. And it was not said in a complimentary manner. We work to live, African Guyanese, Brackett Williams found, is that living is what it's all about. And let us focus on the living aspect. Whereas the Indians, the Africans are saying, oh, they just live to work. They're only working, saving. So this attitude as to how we see work is critical because, you know, we work and everybody works hard. We're all hard workers, but work only provides income. Everybody gets an income, but wealth, income doesn't necessarily translate into wealth. Wealth has to be something that is accumulated and is transgenerational. So what is the worldview? You work, you live to work. Because what Indians do, for example, the way they see it, in a very personal sense, I grew up with my nanny who was born in 1900 and my nana was born in 1896. And their attitude to work was that you had to be working all the time. So it was a fair criticism. Indians live to work, but they also live to save. Their motto was if you earn $10, you never spend more than $7, $8. So there is that, within that work ethic, there is that compulsion to save. So your attitude to work is very, very important. And I think in the present, to the extent that those values in the two communities are different, we need some empirical studies, and Mr. Bisram can do an up-to-date study. The attitudes towards working and saving, I am positing, in the two communities are different. And it has led to troubles before, and I'm predicting it will lead to troubles in the present, because each group will look at work and savings and accumulating and building differently. So look at it, and so I summarize and I stop here, that culture itself is critical with your economic advancement and how you do that. And in Guyana, since we look at this aspect of culture differently, it will lead to different outcomes, and that may lead to problems between these two communities.
So as Ravi was explaining here, culture is not just song and dance and wine, and it is not doing Quran Sharif and a Jandi or a Puja or a Katha or a Bhagwat or a Ramayan. Culture is also your behavioral attitude and your attitude towards other groups within the society or even among your own groups. It is a very, very complex behavioral phenomena. It is not just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 items. It's your total way of life having to do with every aspect of your life. Salim?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And like I mentioned in my opening statement, that that culture is how you see yourself and how you engage with others, and the rules or the expectations are defined by your historical point in terms of where you are with your culture, you know. And again, Ravi talked about how two groups in Guyana, the Indians and Africans, see work differently, and that is not something out of the ordinary. I think different groups, even if you compare Indians with Chinese, or you Chinese and Portuguese, you'll find them thinking differently. And again, these groups culturally should not be defined from the point that we find them. You know, we should look back at what are some of these challenges or some of these battles and some of these hurdles that they had to cross to be where they are today. And we know within the African community how much gutting was done of the African mind, and today they look at things differently, you know, and it could go for other areas, you know. When you look at family, when you compare how Indians look at family and how Africans look at family, you see a distinct difference in commitment and in things like
or in marriage life.
What is that?
In marriage life as well.
Correct, marriage and family and so on. And this is not about knocking a culture or putting one culture above the other. It's about how do we look at what we have right now and culturally, and to a large extent, it might be how do we reculture our people. I think there needs to be some of that as well. And it goes with social structures. If you look at Indian villages and African villages, it's quite different. It's quite different. I find in the Indian community, there is a lot more, people more interested in building out their community, ensuring that the roads are right, ensuring that their yard is correct, ensuring that there's some good governance and those kind of things. Africans, villages can be quite different. They, of course, have more of an underground social structure to their village that everyone kind of embrace. So these are going to happen, and because where we are today, it is critical that we look forward. For the last, I would say, 40, 50 years, of course, we've been through the British colonial days where we had to change our names because our names were not good enough to teach or to have a position. We had to change our clothing because it didn't suit, the suit that the whites wore. Africans had to adjust to what they were doing. Native Americans, Native Guyanese, the Amerindians, that was wholesale change of religion. They were embracing a religion that actually tried to kill them. So there was a lot of dynamics during the colonial days that really ruptured and disrupted the even flow, the continuous flow of cultural preservation and cultural advancement. So you can say literally that when Indians were dropped in Guyana, culturally we were stunted. We were left to decay, to just drift along, do your work and continue going. Then of course came the independence time, and we all, there was some patriotism. We got back to being Guyanese. We got our own flag. We got our own government constitution. We're now running our own affairs. And again, from an Indian perspective, which I can speak of most honestly and sincerely, that to a large extent, the early days of the dictatorship, Indians felt that they were somewhat sort of being culturally cut, or almost cultural genocide. Marginalized. So things like funding was not available for Indian cultural activities. Whatever was culturally ours we were told that it's not good enough to be Guyanese. To be Guyanese, you had to wear this kind of clothes or not wear this kind of clothes, or you had to eat this kind of thing, or you had to change your name, or do something different. So there's a lot of disruption, and of course for Africans as well. I think to a large extent, after independence, when they should have been taking their African culture and really catapult it to grow and develop and build their communities, it served as a way of entitlement almost, which and as you know, entitlement doesn't help anyone. And I think today where we are after the post dictatorship period, and now we are in a position where, as Ravi said, the oil is flowing. Guyana has benefited from billions and billions of dollars on an ongoing basis, at least for the next 15, 20 years. I think it's a good time. It's a good time for us to do some inventory of our nation and its cultural identity, where this is going. Unfortunately, and sadly for Guyana, and as we all know, it's the middle class of any country that really promotes and advance, preserve, protect, whatever you want to call it, culture. It's never the poor people because they're busy trying to make a living. It's not the wealthy class, because the wealthy class is just about a different level. It's the middle class in any country that really push and promote and ensure that there's a culture for tomorrow. Guyana has a very, very thin layer of middle class that can be entrusted to take culture, whether it's African or Indian, whatever culture, to the next level, and that is scary. That is scary, But I think with the wealth and the new economy that Guyana is developing, there will be a swelling of the middle class, and that is where I feel there's an opportunity for this kind of discussion to kind of build some root, to grow some root. With the wealth, there's so much things that can be done that have not been done for the past 50, 60 years. Whether it's more real museums for our communities. Guyana has a museum that's almost a secret, and it's so secret that it's locked down, and I don't think anybody even goes there. If you want to only be an anthropologist, you go there. But a place like a museum that has artifacts of culture should be in everyday use by everyone. You're talking about heritage sites. You're talking about research work on culture and cultural development. Culture in itself, has to be recorded. Our history. So these are some of the areas I believe some of that wealth can be used to really put a focus on culture, bearing in mind that culture has its spill-off benefits. Things like patriotism, tourism, and all that kind of stuff. But I know in the current budget, and we must give some credit here. There's $1.4 billion allocated for art and culture, out of 1.7 trillion, which is about 1% of money to be used for art and culture. I personally believe that more can be spent in this area, and more importantly, I think this discussion and this consultation on culture should be something that is discussed at a wider level in Guyana. In Guyana's case, and sorry for rambling on, but this final point, I think culture in Guyana has been maintained and is still there, in whatever shape or form, limited or in excess, because of personal passion by people and communities and religious organizations and so on. I think the time has come when this has to be a broader engagement, not only by those persons, but government playing a more active role in pursuing the advancement of culture for all its people, because at the end of the day, our greatest asset is our cultural diversity.
So on that note of cultural diversity, very often I hear Guyanese say, "Man, I celebrate Guyanese culture, man. Me not into this American culture. Me celebrate Guyanese culture, or me celebrate Trinidad culture." You want to clarify that, Ravi?
Well, I think Salim has introduced a very good strand that we ought to develop and expand, which is certain cultures or certain cultures or certain groups are more emphasized than others. And therefore, when we talk about advancing color, we need to have a much more balanced focus on that. And this itself is historical. And we can start with our African sisters and brothers. When they were dragged across, there was an explicit compulsion by the Europeans that they must be stripped of their culture so that they could not speak their original languages. For instance, they couldn't have their original practices of their religious. It was banned. Obia, the way they expressed themselves, the way they saw nature as part of the divine and all of that. It was ground out of them and inculcated in them, as I said before, was European notions of culture, where everything white was the epitome on top and everything black was the opposite, the antithesis. Yet here were black people told to fit in there. Where are they really put? Never at the top, always at the bottom. And that is the irony with African Guyanese, that they had to adopt a particular culture in which everything black was derided, right? Sin was black, everything bad was black, and yet they had to accept that worldview. When the Indians and others were brought in, there was an attempt to place them on that hierarchy with white at the top and white culture at the top, and at the bottom would be this new, what they call Creole culture, which they say was an amalgamation of white but with some African culture. But that African culture aspect was very innocuous. Let's be blunt about it. So when the African, at the end of slavery, set up his schools and his church, it was always a white headmaster and a white pastor. The whites were still there. But when we came in now with our own culture, our culture was derided as really heathen and so out of place that it wasn't even part of that scale. So we were seen as it was derided. So as we try to rise up in the society, we inculcated some of that perspective. And you will see when I, for example, grew up, as soon as an Indian became educated and got a civil service job or some job in the wider society, they would jettison their Indian habits. So, for example, if at home they would like dal and rice and bhaji and sane it and eat it and enjoy it, which I still do, if you go in public, you're not supposed to do that. I always talk, first of all, you can't even say dal. You got to say dal. You get me? Because this white dal and water was seen as crude, the way we spoke. So when I went to do my A-levels in Georgetown for the first time at the age of 18 and 19, I then heard that wato is better than wato. Wato is better than wata. Somehow they were both mispronunciation, but one mispronunciation was better. You understand? And that is where we still have this in Guyana today. So when you look at many Indian professionals in Guyana, they're very embarrassed about their Indian cultural expressions. And they bend over backwards to try to fit in upon what their notion of what Guyanese culture is. But that's not by accident, I want to say that. This thing called Creole culture, after in the independence era, Eric Williams in Trinidad and Forbes Burnham in Guyana, they pushed Creole culture as the national culture. So when you talk about steel pan and steel band and National School of Dance and the National School of Music and all that, and even today we're talking about putting music into the school curriculum. I don't hear anybody talking about dholak and tasa in that curriculum. All I hear about steel pan day in, day out. Steel pan is a Trinidadian impression that was seen as so low class in Trinidad that the middle class was banned from speaking it. It is Eric Williams who literally took up steel band from something called tambo mambo or tambo tambo with bamboo you beat as you parade, right? And he created a whole Trinidadian culture in that part called Westbrook. And he, in a sense, polished up that culture and gave it as West Indian culture. And we adopted here in Guyana. The point I want to make, and we got to be concrete, is that to talk about the Guyanese culture, we can't be flip about it, because there were aspects to deny Indian the right to their heritage. So, for example, as a boy, I could only hear Indian music at 5 o'clock in the morning, right? And at 9 o'clock at night. A famous man named Ayub Hamid had something called Memory Album. And this was privately sponsored. Both were privately sponsored. And yet they were put into these ungodly hours when the rest of Guyana were asleep. On Sunday, you had a couple of hours, sponsored programs. And yet in the 1970s, the PNC government insisted, one of the announcers named Ishwi Singh, he's on record as saying that Minister Haywood Ben told him and put it in writing that he had to include 2 quote-unquote English songs, meaning calypso or you know, American or British songs, must be on these Indian programs that were sponsored, right? All of the Indian ethnic groups like East Indian Cricket Club had to change their name to Everest. You couldn't say the word Indian. So there was a conscious policy of cloaking and denying Indians the right to their cultural expressions, and you were defined as being second class and therefore second rate. So all of this must be seen when in the present we talk about Indian advancing culture. Both Africans and Indians must look at the historical record and try to rectify those historical distortions that were introduced consciously by the British and by our own selves unconsciously.
Salim,
I
anything
think
to add to
that too. I think coming back to what we were talking about, advancing and moving culture forward, so that a nation can be a better people and a better place. And I think that's the danger of trying to fit, multiple cultures into one template, that we attempted to do or we experimented on in the 70s and 80s and so on. It creates a discomfort. It disrupts who I am. And if it disrupts who I am, I'm dysfunctional. I can't function in a Guyana where my dal and rice or my cooking with karahi or me wearing certain kind of clothes is looked as something less than Guyanese. And I know every day when I wake up I'm Guyanese, but when I eat my dal and rice, I'm not Guyanese at that moment. Or when I do something that I truly believe is part of what defines me, it's not. And of course, that had its own political dynamics in terms of the dictatorship and the rigging of election and denying rights. You got a people, you could do whatever you want to do with them, and just like whites did it to blacks, that was thrusted upon Indians as well in the 70s and 80s. So for Indians, sometime, and coming back to what you asked Vishnu about celebrating culture and all that kind of thing, Guyanese culture, and so, if I'm not given the space, I am a very dysfunctional person. In countries like the US, where diversity is not only tolerated, but it's promoted and it's part of who you are. Canada, a country that is fully embracing the multiculturalism, multi-ethnicity kind of society. They're using that multicultural promotion as the basis for economic development. Canada is doing it because they want to make sure that everybody's comfortable and they're happy. In the United States, we know not only are you allowed to build one of the largest mandirs in New Jersey, like they did. I think it's one of the biggest in the world, Ravi.
In the world. In the
world, one of the big in New Jersey, and not only are you allowed to do your Italian thing or your Greek thing or your African thing. I mean, I'm the head of the Islamic Games of North America, which is one of the largest Muslim sports and athletic event in the US and Canada. And this event is not only supported by Muslim companies and brands and organizations, but you got cities who are embracing it. The city of Brampton in Canada, they embrace the Islamic Games because the Islamic Games is good for 25% of their population, that are Muslim, and 30% of Mississauga and so on. So I think to again coming back to what I've been harping on is on readdressing where Guyana is and where it needs to go, and the critical role culture plays in that, and ensure that that people and their cultures are being promoted, are being accepted, and are being even funded. I see no harm in like Ravi said with the steel pan scenario where they give money and the government supported it and promoted it as an art form, and we know clearly it's not an Indo-Guyanese thing or Indo-Caribbean or Indo-Trinidadian. It's from the African, and it should be, and it should be promoted and it should be funded. But there are tons of other opportunities within the Indian community that Indians pay for by themselves. I think things like these should be made available. Funding in the United States and Canada for cultural preservation and tax benefits. As you know, religious organizations in the U.S. Because of their promoting certain ideals have all kind of benefits. So I think create the space, make the people comfortable, make them more functional in the society you want to build, and that should be almost a strategy towards developing a budget for culture as Guyana progresses. Guyana is going to have a lot of other challenges when it comes to oil and its newfound economy. Apart from the traditional Indian and African cultures that needs to be advanced and protected and given adequate space, you're going to get another 500,000 people that are coming to Guyana that's coming with 500,000 different cultures too. You're getting people from Houston, you're getting people from Dubai, you're getting people from India, all kind of people. So again, what are we establishing? And maybe we need to look at cultures like Kuwait and look at how Dubai did it, because Dubai is only 20-30% native people. The vast majority are not from there. Yet there is a Dubai culture that you want to go and see and experience, right? So I think these are some of the challenges as we advance culture in Guyana. The new economy is going to bring 1 million different kind of people that we got to figure out how we give them their space as well. We can't deny them their space, because if we want our space to practice and eat our dal and rice, we want them to also get their crepe. They want to eat their crepe as well, So that'll be a challenge as we look at embracing this whole issue of culture in Guyana.
The challenge of cultural diversity, Ravidev?
Yes, and it is a challenge because, like I said, we started from an idea of you had to assimilate, you had to
Mhm.
become one. E pluribus unum, out of many, you
Comes
become
one.
one. But we are saying that we must celebrate our diversity. So it takes a whole new worldview. And this is where, going back to our traditions from India, India has always dealt with diversity. And so, for example, when the Indians came, the Muslims were a very small component. And within the Muslim 12%, the Shia was even smaller, of course, a mere, handful. But yet, the festival of Muharram, when the Battle of Karbala, I think, was commemorated, and the great sacrifice of Hassan and Hussein, that became Guyana's first national festival. It became Guyana's first national festival during the time of indentureship, where Hindus and Muslims and Africans and Portuguese and Chinese and everybody participated. And that kind of unity was not viewed with favor by the authorities. And the
Mhm.
practice was banned both here and in Trinidad. In fact, in Trinidad, there was a big shooting and several people were killed. So it shows you that spontaneously um, there can be that unification, but if it did not suit those who are in power, then you will not either be encouraged and sometimes you will even be stymied. And that is what we have to look out for. But those in power at various times, that we saw Mr. Burnham and his regime, uh, contrary to what some people may say, um, did not see uh, diversity as being essential to his political survival, and so therefore stymied political diversity. In the present, I think what Salim is educating us about is that, and it is true, Guyana will not be able to develop without a huge influx of quote unquote outsiders who will also, like we did, bring in their cultures. So, unless we have a very firm cultural policy in place that we all understand, when I say we, I'm saying we, quote unquote, original Guyanese, both Africans and Indians and Portuguese and Chinese and who are left, unless we are very firm in how we want this process to go forward, it can be taken away from us, the initiative as to what this new Guyanese culture will be. You go to certain parts of Bartica, you go to even certain parts of Georgetown, and you'll be
Yes.
wondering whether you are in some Spanish section of Caracas or Rio, or you're in Georgetown. Those influences are that strong. So I think this is not something we can put on the black burner. We have to advance our culture, but first we have to have a clear understanding that we're not talking of culture as a monolith. And I have used the metaphor of the rhizome, like, turmeric and ginger, they are called rhizomes, where you have a plant, but there's no one root. As the stem at the bottom moves, it sends out different roots. And all these roots nourish a single plant. No root is cut up. But in the past, to use the metaphor up to now, they see culture as a taproot. And to be blunt about it, they see Creole culture as Caribbean culture. And that's the taproot. And that has caused this great friction where ultimately you have to resent the fact that I have to jettison what I'm doing, what I know made me succeed, and I have to jettison it and go and sport up on weekends and behave in a particular fashion because it is not quote unquote cool. So I think we need to accept what is called a rhizomatic um, view of culture for a national culture, that there will be many roots, as
Yes,
many
that's
roots as there is. But all of those roots must become part of one whole. And as I wrote in my column last week, maybe this will be what we call the hyphenated Guyanese one Guyana. Yes, it has to be one Guyana, but we have to accept it will be hyphenated. Like in America, I grew up among uh, Jewish Americans and Italian Americans in Bay Ridge, and in Midwood, the Jewish Americans when I went to Brooklyn College. And everybody were living peacefully with each other because they were given the space to use the term Salim used, to be able to flourish. And yes, flourish they did. They had their own institutions, so the Jews could form their own yeshivas and their own
Mhm.
hospitals. Maimonides, where my children were born. And I think we need to have that here to that acceptance. And don't look askance as the presidency do, as some cultures, like how they look down at Indian culture and Amerindian culture. Whether we like it or not, we got to talk about our Amerindian original people of this land who are still seen as Bok people. And that use of the word Bok from the Dutch times as somehow wild and not quite, within civilized humanity. And so when we advance culture, all of these cultures must be advanced. So the goals that we all have to live a good life and to live a prosperous life and to live a happy life, we can achieve our goals within our own cultures.
Advancing our culture. Salim?
well. And like I mentioned, and I think Ravi also kind of echoed it. Um, we are at a turning point in Guyana. We are at a crossroad again. A very important crossroad when it comes to culture. When we were brought from India, that was a crossroad. In our interaction when with African communities, when we became more mainstream, that became a crossroad. Independence, another crossroad. I think the crossroad we are at right now, where almost equal amount of Guyanese are outside of Guyana and are influencing behavior and interaction of those living in Guyana, which are their family and friends and so on. That's another dynamic, right? Then you've got another 500,000 all kind of people that will be coming to Guyana for the oil rush and to benefit from it and so on. And a significant percentage of them are going to be there for extended period. They will want to be comfortable to experience some of their cultural traits and so on. But it all begins with what's with here and now. How do we and again, culture requires resource and requires policy at the scale that we're talking about right now in terms of the nation. So it requires policies to be in place that's looking at who we are today, and if we're going to grow and develop as a nation, therefore we got to define who we are. We can't let anybody come and then be changing the definition every day that somebody else comes, or new ideas and all this kind of stuff. So we've got to put some resource into into this whole crafting of a cultural policy, and start the discussion with Guyanese across Guyana. I think there's no doubt that Guyanese love their culture, and wants to see it not disappear, right? They want to see it sustain itself over the next 20, 30, 40 years. I believe just like our seawalls are being battered and slowly washing away, I believe just like our beaches are washing away, I believe just like our our qualified Guyanese with all the brains are slowly being drifting away from Guyana and going everywhere else, where whether they're teachers or doctors or whatever it might be. I believe culture as well in Guyana is eroding at an incredible pace and needs to be addressed. There's no nation that can sustain itself and be strong and proud of itself if it's not grounded in culture. And to me, that's a danger I see whenever I go to Guyana. Our dietary palate has changed. We want to eat fried chicken and Popeye and KFC all the time. And in America, people trying to run away from that because of all the diabetes, the cholesterol, and obesity it creates. And that might be more into the health sector, but that's an example of what's going to happen with culture. And again, if you remove people from their dal and rice, you're removing people from their comfort zone. And you remove people from their comfort zone, they can't produce and they can't develop and they can't grow. So I think as the current administration, has some initiative that it's promoting, like the One Guyana. They have 1% of the budget being allocated for art and culture. I think this is a great beginning of a conversation. It's not the end. I don't think we have a document or a mission or a vision of where we want to take our culture into the near future. And again, it's going to be not only is the lack of a policy and a lack of resources in dealing with culture in Guyana eroding our cultural identities and our ability to have culture work for us. You're going to have, again, that wave of people that's coming. That's going to also be another layer of attack that will look at, that will be eroding some of this, what we're talking about. So I totally agree. There needs to be a high level discussion, and I'm kind of saddened that to date, what is it, like 50 years, not 50, it was like 30 years after the end of dictatorship in Guyana, we still don't have a strong, well-articulated, well-developed cultural identity that lays out the game of the rule of the games, in terms of where we're going and what direction and what kind of resources are required. I know myself and Ravi and others, and we've talked about it, and we've exchanged thoughts and so on. But things like the National Archives, which is an important connection to our heritage and our cultural history. Again, those things should be digitized and shared. I mean, millions of people around the world wants to know about those things. We talked about the cultural genocide in the 70s and 80s, but little have we done to undo a lot of that. So I mean, in terms even technology, I mean, right now, because of the drifting culture of Guyana, and I'm talking general here, people are creating their own crazy stuff, and it's not good for Guyana. You're talking about chutney music, which is a local invention, which has some, there's some creativity in it, but that is not helping our people. You're singing about rum, singing about your neighbor wife and all these kind of things. It's very degenerative to a large extent. Even culturally as a people, Indian specifically, rum itself has seeped in as a main pillar of our existence. At one time it wasn't. You know, and these are the things. These are the things that needs to be addressed, because you don't want, yes, culture is going to be dynamic and will keep changing, but it can't change for the worst. It should change to make us better people, be more creative. India, I'm come back to India. India has a great foundation when it comes to culture, and they've been able to take that and create an industry which is called technology that's unrivaled in the world today. You know, everybody's in India right now, you know, benefiting from the cultural advancement of India, not knowing a lot of that came from the deep foundation that made them embrace and commit and grow the technology sector. So, I mean, these are the kind of things I think needs to be brought to the attention of lawmakers and those who are building budgets. So we don't allow culture to be our enemy in the next 10, 15 years.
Your culture, as you mentioned, is very, very dynamic. It is not static, and so we drop certain things, we add new things, we borrow from others, we eat pizza, and macaroni and so on, and others.
And in Canada you can eat pizza that is butter chicken pizza.
Yeah. and others eat our roti and so forth. So change will happen. It's inevitable. But as you rightly pointed out, there need to be some kind of policy on how you address the problems of culture. You can't let certain aspects of culture disappear altogether. And as happened in the 70s, 60s, and 80s, in which there was, to use your term, cultural genocide, no one has addressed those issues and problems. And they need to be addressed as well. Ravi, you have anything else to add?
Well, I wanted to illustrate some of what we've been talking about from my own experience. Yeah, I'm the oldest among you guys here. I'm a veritable dinosaur going back to the 50s and 60s. And I can talk about it from my own experience, that in the early years, there was a very vibrant singing within the traditional modes of singing, the genres that we brought from India at the local level. In the Islamic community, there were qasidas. In the Hindu community, there were all kind of ghazals, which is an Islamic art form, but it can be applied anywhere. And that's the point I want to make, that in India, music is an amalgam of Islamic and Hindu, practices, and it's called Indian music, Hindustani music, and we brought that at the village level. So that vibrant expression, because they say all art comes out of our own suffering, out of the secretions of our suffering, and then the middle class simply polishes it up. But if you look and study, all creativity comes from below, and the middle class, like I said, will polish it up. So we brought that, for example, the songs of parting, called the Bidesia songs from North India, that the men would have left their villages and gone abroad, gone to Guyana, gone to, they call it Damrutapu, gone to Fiji. That was a whole genre of singing. And if you read those songs, such deep poetry of separation and longing, and when will they see each other, very deep poetry. But they were not seen as proper, and they died out. Even when we came to Guyana and we adopted the English language, the broken English language in the Sugar Estates and so on, the anthropologist Vedvatuk from Indiana University, he traversed Guyana and he collected thousands of songs written what we call the broken, oh Maninja, what is happening with price, rice and flour, dear, and what is going on with the wages. It's an expression of how the people felt that, with their working conditions. And he got thousands of them. We don't even have them in Guyana. I've been trying to get them from Indiana University. They are tapes he made, and they need to be digitized and brought in. But the point is, Eric Williams in Trinidad took that folk art of calypso and pan and tambo tambo and made it into national art forms by funding it in that section called Westbrook. It's still there in Trinidad, where Bernie McBride's theater, was allowed to flourish. And that is how those things, the middle class, Eric Williams and others, polish it up, and it becomes an art form, which today Guyana adopted wholesale. The irony, of course, that while you had in Guyana our own art forms, we adopted others because Indian art forms, which was so vibrant as recorded by Vatuk, right? We can talk about the rum and the rum shop, but in the rum shops, there is a whole art form of singing, and the dholak and the beat was done on the tables. And there were individuals who were literally genius at giving that beat with the rum shop table and singing about what was going on in the Bagdam and extemporaneously, making do. The point I want to make is that we must not let this opportunity slip by again. As in times of change, that is when those at the bottom who are feeling the change will need to express themselves so that they can feel that but they have to be heard. Unlike the past, what I'm saying, I am hoping that the present government, now that we have this money, the money dedicated to art, quote unquote art, but not just be what is the accepted vision of what is art. Art comes from below, and therefore we must be on the lookout and encourage that in the schools, at all fora. We must look out for that and then harness that and create a true Guyana ethic. I will conclude this portion by saying this, that very few people, I go to the Marriott fairly often. The kids like to go there. You go there, you spend the weekend and what have you, because it's there, it's ours. But right next to the Marriott is the depot where every Indian, those 239,000 Indians who came to Guyana, when they landed near Starbrook Market at the docks, they would walk down Water Street and they would go to that depot, which is now right next to Starbrook. It's the NSERD building, right next to Starbrook Market. That should be a national monument. Everybody passes it on their way to Starbrook, to Marriott. But all these big shots who go to Marriott there should have been a big sign at least to show that this is where 239,000 people. Look at Ellis Island. That is where most of the immigrants in the 19th century passed through Ellis Island. And it's a big tourist spot. This depot there should be a tourist spot for people to know that here were the East Indians, this is where they came, and from here they were then distributed to these sugar plantations across Guyana. I'm saying these are the kind of historical memory we should have. At the University of Guyana, there must be programs about these things. Salim talked about digitization of our archives. You know how much money that 1 million Guyanese who are outside of Guyana, their children, I have grandchildren abroad, they want to know from whence they came. That in itself can become an industry in terms of tracing linkages.
Mm-hmm.
That's my take.
On the issue of monument, recognizing the presence of certain groups where they arrive from and so forth. Last week, we had a cultural icon, Mohan Nandu, passed away. And the state really has not provided much support for Mohan Nandu and other artists who are heroes, unsung heroes of our country over the last 75 years, 100 years. Salim, don't you think the state should play a greater role in providing support for the arts, as Ravi used the term arts?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think especially given Guyana's history, especially over the last 50 years, I think it is only sensible that the government understands its critical role at this time, at a time when we have the resources and we can, ensure that there is a pathway for development without disrupting cultural life, you know. But again, this comes back to having the commitment, the resources, and the policies in place. I know of Mohanandu, if I'm not mistaken, Ravi, he's from the West Coast or one of the islands, right? West, Anakatrina, correct. I remember him and attending a lot of his singing. He used to do all the Bollywood music, and he was almost an original. And and sadly, he is a cultural icon that fell and no one heard, no one knew, and therefore slowly disappeared. And that's what they say: when someone dies, a library dies, right? When I'm sure when he died, a whole opportunity died. A guy who not only understanding new music and so on, but a guy who could have expanded he could have created many more Mohanandus. And it is this, to a large extent, it is to a country's detriment when we find talent like this and we're not able to invest in them. Because even with all the best of policies, what's that going to do if you don't have a Mohanandu, right? You can have all the resources, all the policy, and all that kind of stuff. But if you don't have a Mohanandu who is a glaring example of what can be invested in, then you're not going anywhere. And this, without a policy, this will continue to happen. There are a lot of talented people that I know in Guyana. The ones who make it to the top are the ones who are going to be singing, doing all the expression that is unhealthy. People eat fried chicken. People eat fried chicken which is readily available. There's a big discussion in the United States that blacks in America don't have access to fresh, healthy food, right? And that is causing a lot of issues. Like for blacks to access fresh apple and bhaji and bora and so on, they got to literally leave their community, go to another community to buy it. Now, black lawmakers are saying, hey, we got to change some of these laws. We got to change either the taxes, change something, get these fruits and vegetables in here. Similarly with Guyana, we got to figure out, what is it that we need to put in place to ensure that we can capture and cultivate what we have. And there's a lot of talent out there, and it's not only in music, it's in art, it's in storytelling, it's in writing, it's in sports, and it is the duty of a government to protect its people, and a big part of protecting me is to ensure that my commitment, my culture and my identity lives on. And I don't want to be too selfish here, but another example of someone like Mohanandu was my own father, who was a Caribbean athletic champion in weightlifting. He broke a lot of records in Guyana, and he was, when the Albion Sports Complex opened up, he was the guy that they brought in to do a competition. He won it. It was a regional competition, for all of Guyana and the Caribbean. He won that. And when I hear his story, here's a guy that extremely talented, was at the top of Gaisuko in his time, had to leave Guyana. Here's almost a legend, like Mohanandu. This my dad, if you go to Albion and so on, is a legend. People talk about him as though he's some giant, and he had to leave his village, his people, his work area, and go to another country, and just to be another fallen tree in the forest, So I think there is, we gotta figure out how do we keep our talent and how do we grow our talent.
That's a very nice point, and thank you for bringing up your father's an unsung hero. That we not many Guyanese are familiar with that, and that should be in the record and history books as well.
That gym at Albion is famous. When Muhammad Ali visited Guyana, he went to that gym in Albion. You know that?
That's right. Yes.
He was taken to that gym, Muhammad Ali.
Yes. And my grandfather was in that picture, Haji Ali.
Was that him?
Yes, Haji Ali was in that picture with Muhammad Ali and so on.
Yes.
So yeah. And these are the things. I think, like a Mohanandu, there's no reason why a street in Anakatrina can be named after him. There's no reason why some kind of plaque should not be there. There's no reason why there shouldn't be some kind of cultural funding for the. By the way, Anakatrina, that area is full of talent. I remember in our days working that area. There's so many people that can tell story and talk and joke and all that kind of stuff.
Probably masjid there, very good Qasida singers in that masjid.
Qasida singers, that's right. So there's no reason why a Mohanandu, and this is where I think even the local NDC at Anakatrina need to take some initiative and say, hey, I get a bunch of heroes here I want to start celebrating. Change all the name from First Street, Second Street, and Cross Street, and Back Street and Front Street to Mohanandu Street.
Very good point. Excellent point. Yes. That's how we recognize our heroes and our culture as well. Any final points, gentlemen?
Well, I have one suggestion picking up on Salim's, and it's one of my pet peeves also, as to how after everything is banned in America for being unhealthy, is then or the West, and then is then sent down to the third world for us to consume. First, it was cigarettes. And then that was sent down to the third world. And now it's fast foods, where we are now gobbling up all these fried chicken that are so unhealthy. And I come back to my old dal and rice, that there were 10 of us in the family. My dad was working on the estate, not more than $26, had to take care of those 10 kids. But you had, and look at dal and rice and bhaji, or dal and rice and baigan choka. This is a balanced meal. Even if you didn't add shrimp into the bhaji, or you didn't add anything like that, which is more protein, the bhaji is vegetable, the dal has its protein, the rice is carbohydrates, the oil that you fried it gives it fat. That's a balanced meal. And so no matter how poor we were, you always had a big pot of dal, you had your rice, and you had your bhaji and so on for the side. And you survived, and not only survived, we prospered. So when my great-grandfather came and their average height was 5'2", 5'3", I am 5'10" and a half. My younger brother is 5 or 6 footer. The point is that same meal that was derided, them only dal and rice, that it was so healthy that we just, our phenotypical potentials were expressed with that food, and we got the whole true thing. The point I'm making is, as we, for example, create restaurants for all these people who are going to be visiting, how come we don't have more Bhojpuri type restaurants offering this kind of food, right? I remember back in 1988, we had a fundraiser in Trinidad, and we ran this Bhojpuri food, and we served it on, platter Prince Albert platter, the top British platter. We had your choker and your, your dal and rice, and no implement served. You sani with your hand. And I remember when this gift launched itself at the Pegasus in those days, there were no implements. You had to eat it with your fingers, and you serve the same basic food and all that. So I want to say to come back to advancing culture. First, there must be an acceptance, because as the big ones do, the others will follow. There has to be an acceptance by the elite. And I'm so proud of Irfan introducing people eating seven curry on the stage with many of the events in a leaf, in a purine leaf, in a lotus leaf. That is, as it shows that acceptance, and we need to push that and let it go forward. So I think that our dishes, as an example, it's not all the other cultures, they can serve their dish too. I enjoy a good pepper pot, but the point I want to say, we should not be proud of one, and we should now market that. Let us say this is as authentic a Guyanese dish as any other, and we can make money, and we can become happy with making money and not eat that fried chicken as being pushed down our throat. Thank you. That's my closing comments.
Any final points, Salim, when we close off?
No, I'm good. I think I've said enough, and it's just a matter of echoing what Ravi said. The leadership having a deeper embrace on this issue, because it affects patriotism, it affects our ability to produce and develop as a country, and it will mitigate any kind of danger or any kind of issues that can come out of the next wave of immigrants that's coming to Guyana. The next wave of oil immigrants that's going to be coming to Guyana to do things. So the first wave was white people coming to natives. Then the second wave was the African. Third wave was the Indians and other indentured. The next wave of immigrants are going to be the oil workers, and it's going to impact a lot of stuff. So we got to take that into consideration and look at policy making, throw some a lot more resource into cultural development.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for taking your time off to discuss this issue here with us this evening, and viewers and listeners for joining us. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Globespan 24/7, Mr. Nohar Singh and Devin Bissoon. Good night.